a computer using your voice, and it's responding to you using language, okay? So that's why I'm interested. But Cohen and Phillart in the Codes Lab in Human Development and the Mind Music Machine Lab in Industrial Systems Engineering are interested in that because this is a way for humans and computers to interact, right? So we can also look at voice assistants as human-computer interaction, a kind of mediation where the modality is speech. So, kind of thinking about voice assistants, they're kind of becoming more and more common all the time. We use them driving. I don't even think I use them very much, and then I realize that I'm using it all the time when I'm driving and getting directions and things. Cohen's talk last week, if you saw it, they're using it for story times with children. We're getting voice assistants, so really earlier and earlier age of people are interacting with these things. Linguistically, a lot of the interest in voice assistants has really been on the listening side of things. So if you're interacting with language with a voice assistant, how good is it at understanding you, right? And so one thing we find is it has a lot of bias. It doesn't recognize certain dialects as well as other dialects, and that might make some people less likely to use them, etc. And a lot of people are kind of working on fixing that. What we are coming at this today is an interest on the actual voice of the voice assistant itself. And so if you think about Siri or you think about Alexa, these voices are usually female, and you could have a lot of discussion just about that fact, right? But usually they sound American, especially if you're using them in America, and they speak a kind of a-regional variety. You couldn't, even though the people using it speak lots of different dialects, not just regional dialects, different like social, ethnic, all these different dialects, right? Okay, so what would happen, or what does it look like if we put some variation in the voices of the voice assistants themselves? So there hasn't been a lot of work on this, and a lot of it is kind of anecdotal. We know in general that listeners prefer voice assistants that kind of are like them in personality, that they perceive as being like them kind of in some ways. There's some work on that. And Siri, a few years back, released a few new kind of voice options, not the default one, but two of them sounded black, right? People were listening and they're like, this sounds black, and so they were, like, researchers kind of showed that Apple hasn't like said explicitly these were made to be, but everyone's kind of hearing them this way, and studies have shown this. And so people were anecdotally reporting, like, I like this, like as a black user, I like feeling represented by my voice assistant, right? And this was a comment from a colleague of mine, David Mitchell, just like a week ago. He was talking about interacting with Microsoft Copilot and how he really enjoyed it, talking to it, and he says, it even talks like a brother if you want it to, and how yeah, I do, right? So he was just giving me this example of someone saying, I like that this representation of the voice assistant can sound more like me, right? Okay. The other thing we know, kind of looking at these voice assistants where there's a bit of difference, is that people are going to project the usual dialect stereotypes that they project onto a human voice to these voice assistants, right? So if you change up the voice, we might expect that the social baggage that comes with that is still going to come to the voice assistant, but not very much done. So that's kind of more the subjective experience. What about the actual performance? So if you think about voice assistants, if you're using with driving, that's a really like serious, high-stakes performance situation, et cetera. We're using them, do we trust them? All these other questions. And so there hasn't been anything, to my knowledge, prior to, or not much really, prior to the project that we're all doing, looking at the actual impact of the voice assistants on performance. But Phillart and a student years back did a study with bilingual students at Virginia Tech who are international students, had them in a driving simulator, and the voice assistant was using their native language or using English, and the driving was essentially better when they were when the voice assistant was in their native language, right? And these are Virginia Tech students on campus using English every day, very, very fluent in English, but this was having an impact on their driving ability, right? So that's the linguistic, like different languages, but you could kind of infer that that might mean people might perform better if the voice assistant sounds more like them in terms of their dialect. So, you know, maybe there's subjective reasons to have variation in voice assistant accents, and there might be performance reasons to have variation in voice assistant accents, but there hasn't really been much variation, right? So why is it the case that we don't get a lot of variation, right? So I think one is probably, and this might just really be the case, it's just kind of a default to the mainstream accent, which I'm going to kind of use that term to refer to kind of like a variety that is unmarked in most kind of institutional situations where people kind of don't know where the person's from. They're just kind of like, that's unaccented. And like Phyllis was just saying, everyone has an accent, but this kind of experience of being unaccented. So we're going to use mainstream. So that just might be like, no one just really thought about it, they just went with it. It could be the convenience of available voice models, so they don't have a lot of voice models for different accents. I think this is no longer a good argument because we know now that we can get voice models trained on relatively little data. So this maybe was an excuse years back, but it's kind of not really an excuse anymore. But I want to raise these two other points that I think could be kind of implicitly behind kind of reluctance to use them, concerns that there might be kind of issues about the social baggage these voice assistants might bring if they have different accents, and or there might be issues of intelligibility if they're not in this mainstream dialect, okay? So in our project today, we're going to kind of look at changing up voice assistant accents and see kind of like, does it look like it's hurting performance in any way? Does it look like it's hurting the social evaluations in any way? And the dialect that we're going to be comparing this mainstream, kind of essentially what we already think most Siri and Alexa sounds like, is Southern American English. So Southern US English, there's so much variation in here, but basically this is a dialect that is spoken in the United States, including, if you can see here, Southwest Virginia is clearly in this area, okay? So it's a very recognizable dialect in the US. So if we give people maps and we say, where do people speak English? They always mark up the South. They might not mark up New York, they might not mark up California. Everyone marks up the South and says they speak different. And if we say, how does it sound different? Sometimes they will say things like this, like it is the worst English in America, right? So it has this stigma associated with it, and we know from research that sometimes Southern speakers kind of are facing, people might rate them as lower intelligent or lower social class or something like this, kind of things about status. And this is just kind of showing that too. We've got up the top, to be fair, these were people in Ohio, but this was where they thought speech was proper, and you can see it's kind of northern, and where they literally use the word broken to describe speech, and you can see it's kind of in the South that they're using the term broken, right? So this is kind of pretty common. At the same time, Southern American English also has kind of this solidarity prestige, right? So this is, and this is Southerners saying this, but this was where is it most pleasant, and the South is called pleasant a lot more. And so this was a quote I just found on a website the other day. So Southern American English sounds warm and welcoming, often associated with Southern hospitality. The rhythm of a Southern speech can be soothing, akin to a gentle rocking on a chair, swaying on the porch in the late afternoon sun. So a lot of ideological work happening here, but we also find this in research a lot, that maybe Southern accents get a hit on things about kind of like what we call status factors, but they get a bump in solidarity factors, right? So more trustworthy, more authentic, more friendly. Like there's kind of this trade-off that seems to be happening. So we're going to be asking whether the kind of having the Southern or mainstream voice assistant is having any impact on the participant's experience. And we are a team of many people, so we have different questions we're asking. So I'm interested in something I'm not even really going to talk about today, but how the participant speaks. So are people changing their speech to match the voice assistant? We're looking at working memory tasks, their trust in the system, and then their performance in things like driving, and then obviously their subjective experience. And then we're going to say, okay, does any of this, is it just always like this is more positive, this is more negative, or is it going to depend on the particular task or situation? And then we're going to say, does it depend on who the participant is, right? So a lot of the kind of prior stuff I was hinting at was saying that maybe it matters if you are Southern or if you are Northern, your experience of these different voice assistants is going to be different. Okay. So the voice assistant we created was called Zoe or Zara, because every participant heard two versions in the stuff that I was doing. And they heard two versions in all versions, but we gave them the name Zoe and Zara in our work. And I have to jump out to let you hear these. So we created this in two ways. First off, we used a text-to-speech, 11 labs. They had a Southern model, one Southern model, and like 1,000 more mainstream models. I actually don't know who this is going to be, but let's play it and see.
Hello, I'm Zoe. To help me adjust to your voice, please repeat these words after me.
So that's text-to-speech Southern. Here is text-to-speech non-Southern.
Hello, I'm Zoe. To help me adjust to your voice, please repeat these words after me.
And then we got an actor. Another way we did this was we got an actor to record stimuli for us, and we got the same actor to do 2 different voices. I don't know which one's going to be first.
Hello, I'm Zoe. To help me adjust to your voice, please repeat these words after me.
So that's the more mainstream.
Hello, I'm Zoe. To help me adjust to your voice, please repeat these words after me.
Okay, and so these are the voices that you're going to hear, and we can get into the details of when we use them. Okay, so the first study that we ran, and this was really led by Phila and his graduate student Moon in the Mind Music Machine Lab, where they have a driving simulation, right? So people are in here, they're driving along in this task, they're getting directions from a voice assistant, and they're also, in the key conditions, getting kind of extra information, like so when there's a obstacle on the road, or just kind of like talking to them as things are happening, they're getting this. And kind of the first finding I want to share with you in this task is what we see here on the y-axis is lane deviation. So how much are you kind of like not really in the center of your lane? And what you see is that there is the least lane deviation in the southern accented condition, okay? So you're driving better with the southern accented voice assistant. We see a similar thing when we look at brake pedal force. So essentially it looks like there's a bit smoother driving with the southern accented voice assistant. This one is mediated by participants, so it's for the southern participants. They are kind of driving a little bit better when they have the southern voice assistant. So these are kind of like not huge effects and things, but it's suggesting, right, that if you were going to say anything, the southern accented voice assistant is making driving safer, okay? And then when they ask people a bunch of subjective questions at the end, you know, how warm, how intelligent, how human-like, how computer-like, all these questions about the voice assistant, they got higher warmth ratings for the southern voice assistant, and they got higher social presence ratings, like for the voice assistant, right? So there are these kind of subjective experience things that are also more positive for the southern voice assistant as well in these situations. Okay. So this is driving. This is this high-stakes environment where you might be concerned about things like intelligibility and stuff, and we're actually seeing this payoff for having this southern accented voice assistant. The work that I have been doing, and Cohen and her team have been helping out with a lot, has been thinking about this stuff in smart speakers, right? So you have a speaker and that you're talking to. And so in this study, we bring participants into the lab and we make them interact with the voice assistant, do a bunch of tasks, and the voice assistant is, coming to them through a speaker on the table, okay, so they're experiencing that way. It is not a truly smart voice assistant. In the background, we have one of our research assistants is controlling the voice assistant, right? And so this means essentially we don't have a lot of flexibility in how we respond, what we can do, because it's not a truly smart system. So we told people that we will use a testing a voice system, and we kind of got them to follow a script, semi-follow a script for us, right? So we were like, say this, then ask this, then do this, okay? And so we kind of tell them how to interact with the voice assistant and then to give us their evaluations. So first off, what happens is they go through a calibration stage. I was being hopeful there. I knew sound wasn't work. So the voice assistant says, like, I got to get used to your voice. I'm going to say some words. So the voice assistant says something like brab or bribe. I can't do American. And then the person says bribe. Okay, maybe this one will work, but.
Bribe.
So that's a participant replying.
Bribe.
Sorry. And then we build into the stage, as they're getting into bigger sentences, some mistakes. So we purposely kind of create times where the voice assistant will get it wrong. So the voice assistant says, did you say Billy is always late?
No, I said Billy is at the lake.
Right, so this is the person correcting the voice assistant that we have purposely made make a mistake.
No,
okay,
I
sorry.
said...
Then we get into a bunch of memory games. I'm just going to talk about one with you today, which is the false memory paradigm. So in the false memory paradigm, you hear a list of words, like these words, bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blah, blah, blah. And all of these words have something to do with sleep, but the word sleep is not mentioned. Okay, you can kind of see that. And so what we're looking for is if someone has a false memory and says they heard the word sleep.
Bed, rest, dream, sleep, bed, drowsy, Okay, that's all.
Okay, so I'm giving you, so this is like a real participant doing this. They had a false memory. And so overall, we get false memories about a third of the time, but we get the least, but Southern participants have the least false memory for Southern voice assistants. And so one interpretation of this that's out in the literature is that you are paying more attention and actually really encoding the phonetic details when you don't have false memories. And when you have false memories, you're kind of just listening. You're kind of like, yeah, it was on this topic. I remember the words, like they all got activated, right? And so this might suggest that, and this is a kind of behavioral thing, not a subjective response, that people are literally paying a bit, Southerners are paying more attention to the voice assistants, like really remembering the details of what they said. Okay, we also did a trivia stage. If you think of how you use voice assistants and stuff, you might be like asking it facts or giving you information, right? And so we have things like this where the voice assistant...
Zoe, how old was the oldest person to give birth?
Okay, so asking questions, again, we told them what to ask. And Zoe says, Raju Devi at 7 years old, right? And gives this answer back. And I don't know if that's true. Do you know if it's true? It is true. Okay, but the person doesn't really know. And so when we look at people's response to this, now we see something a little bit different. The Southern participants are less likely to see these ambiguous facts where we don't expect them to really know the answer. They're actually giving the Southern voice assistant a bit of a ping. They're trusting it less. And the Northern listeners are saying, we had some where the answer was just really irrelevant. Like, it was kind of like, what's the ingredient in Coke? And they're like, Coca-Cola is a company. And you're like, that's just a bad answer. And the Northerners are penalizing the Southern voice assistant more for these kind of irrelevant answers, okay? Remembering that across these different trials, they're all getting the same content, okay? And then finally, we have subjective evaluations. So we are seeing a difference in the responses of whether the voice assistant, whether they see themselves in the voice assistant. So the Northerners are saying, the Nova students are saying, this doesn't sound like, the Northern one sounds like me, the Southern one doesn't, and we get the flip response for the Southern participants. So the kind of manipulation, as much as we think this is about being represented, that's working. We kind of see it's small effects, but they're flipped. Here, the Southerners essentially feel more confident using the Southern voice assistant. We also see the same sort of flip pattern here where each group is finding the other, interacting with the other voice assistant accents more frustrating. We get the Southerners saying they would be more likely to trust the Southern versus Northern voice assistant for driving. But the Northerners say they'll be less likely to trust the Southern voice assistant when they are fact-checking, etc. Okay, so lots of kind of like little bitsy information, and we're still actually collecting data for the study here. But going back to those original questions, does the voice assistant impact any of these subjective or kind of more behavioral responses? And the answer, behaviors, it's like, yes, we are seeing evidence that the voice of the voice assistant matters, okay? Are these effects different across different sorts of tasks, whether you're getting someone to drive, whether you're asking if they trust the data they're getting, whether you're asking if they like this? Yes, it matters, and it also matters a lot it seems to matter a lot who the participant is and who the user is, right? So when we think of why we're seeing little variation, I'd already kind of said I don't think the convenience thing holds anymore, but I think, kind of as a blanket statement, the intelligibility and the social associations is concerned that there could be more danger in these serious situations by having voice assistants like driving. That's not holding, right? And also the social associations, sometimes they can be positive and can be helping out. And then obviously there are these advantages, so just anecdotally, but also here we're seeing that the user representation, more users are getting more represented when there's more variation. There could be more trust and humanization of the voice assistant and potentially more engagement or attention on the voice assistant. And one thing I'm quite interested in is how much the engagement and attention system could be about a particular voice, or it could be about unexpected voices and engagement, such that it's not really about having a Southern versus mainstream, it's about having unexpected accents or rotating through different accents to keep you stimulated with your voice assistant. So that would be kind of a future place to go with this. So thank you, and if any of you want to contact me, we are still recruiting for this. Don't tell them what we're doing, but you can share this with your students. We'd love that. Thank you.
What questions do we have in the room? I'm coming over there. Hi, Abby. Thanks. I love linguistics. I love linguistics. So I have a question. It might be a two-part question, but first, in terms of variation, do you think that, like historically even, and maybe up to the present, that the trajectory is lots of variation that levels out, or that we're at a point where we already have kind of like that mainstream accent dialect?
Sorry, are you asking about kind of like the voice assistant accent? Is that what you mean? Or?
I'm asking about like regular human language.
Yeah.
Like a contact equation, like when we first came to the US, and then we've got like a kind of the Midwestern radio announcer voice. I guess what the second question would be is it seems like we're kind of starting from a place where maybe some variation has leveled out, and it's really interesting that with what y'all are looking into, we might be able to go the opposite direction. Does that make sense?
So if I understand correctly, so for those of you who don't know, there's kind of interest in how American dialects are they converging a little bit more? Are they getting different? So Southern American English, we know that a lot of features kind of seem to be the younger generation aren't using them as much. At the same time, we know some things are getting more different in different places that are under the radar. So there's kind of this big question of like, are we heading to like complete homogeny of accents and stuff? And I think, separate from that question, I've been interested in whether voice assistants, like, so when I try and do things like this, I'll be like, and ask my name, and I'm like, Abby, and do a real American accent. And so the question then to me is like, does that make me, that's why I'm interested in how people are talking to these voice assistants. Is that going to be a thing that's even adding to this death blow of, I'm hearing a lot of mainstream American English, and now I'm purposely doing it more so that the voice assistant will understand me, and is that going to kill it? But then what you're kind of counter-arguing is that this could also be a way to kind of help revitalize or maintain some accents if people also see them as institutional, right? Like as something of authority, right? Like this internet, you could have a Southern American accent doing that, right? And that could be like this positive accent pride thing. Yeah, so I think this is really interesting. I think that's definitely this question of, as we're interacting with these more, is that what force have to accent on the ground? Yeah. Yeah.
We've got one online here. Have any participants preferred a Southern accent even if they don't have that accent themselves? For example, I chose an Irish accent for Siri years ago because I felt that it had an actual personality compared to the standard voice. I don't even notice it anymore, but my friends always comment about it.
No, I think that's really interesting. And so we have had, I haven't looked recently at the qualitative comments, but we do have this final question in my stuff where we say, which one do you choose? You did both of them, we counterbalanced, but which one do you want? And so there is kind of some northern people saying like, I just choose this one because I can understand it better, right? That's telling us, they're blaming intelligibility because we're forcing them to choose, and they're kind of blaming it on intelligibility, even though we don't think that that's really what's going on. But we do get occasionally someone saying they want this, it's more interesting, it's more fun, right? And so I do think that that's this kind of other interesting component. And I will say, I think Phil Art's work, the computer stuff showing the social presence of the voice assistant being ranked higher if it's got a Southern accent by Southern participants. But I think if you think about what a regional accent does is it says you're from a place. Like, it's kind of like building this picture of the voice assistant in a way that maybe mainstream is this kind of disembodied, like, kind of accent that's kind of the default, right? But that you're getting some more information about the voice assistant in a kind of humanizing way. So I think that that's a really interesting thing. But yeah, I think, and we could look at different personality types, right? Who are the people who are choosing the Irish accented ones? But even then, I would say it's a mainstream Irish accent or it's a mainstream New Zealand accent, right? It's not all the variation within Ireland or New Zealand or something, yeah.
So this is like the most self-conscious I've ever been about how I talk, which is saying a lot.
I should really say, I think it's bullshit, all that stuff with Southern accents rock, yeah.
Well, it's saying a lot because I had the little lady that took me out of class to the little speech therapy class when I was little, but this is kind of a dumb question because if you did, you'd probably have told us about it, but is there anything you've done or anybody's done with like Southern accent or not, and like perceptions of expertise in different things? I know there's old research on like, especially like male and female stereotypes, like female and male voices being more assign credibility on stereotypical sex role topics. Is there anything you or others have done with that with Southern accents?
Yeah, my linguist colleague Charlotte Vaughan is here, and we were just talking about this, because there's this, the fact stuff we did, right? So this was partly based on a study where they had native and non-native speakers giving facts. And again, these are facts where no one knows the answer, right? Like they're just random, obscure facts, and people rated the facts from the non-native speaker as they didn't believe them quite as much as the facts from the native speaker. And so there's lots of people trying to replicate this. It's not like maybe the most like established fact ever, but we are really interested on like this question of like, what about domain expertise, right? So what if it's, here's my recipe to make the best mac and cheese, or you know, like, or here's my recipe, here's the directions to drive through this southern area of the country or something. Like, you could imagine these domain expertise stuff coming through, and I think that's why I think our results show, but also definitely to follow, is like, I don't think this is going to be like, use this voice here and everything wins, and use this voice here, and it's going to be like, in this situation we're seeing this, in situation we're seeing this. So I think that's really, really, it hasn't really been done with the voice assistants yet, but a lot of this stuff looks a lot like what we get when we just use people voices, right? Yeah.
Thank you, nicely done. So I was curious, because of your sample, college students, and given your team and the diversity of interest in your team, I was curious if people from different generations or children and older individuals have gravitate or might have a preference, and have you think about that as in future, or is it pretty much this convergence of Southern, not Southern?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a first pass, essentially, and then if we're feeling really confident and excited about what we're doing, I think then we kind of split. There are some older folks in this. I will say the other thing that I haven't looked at is we do get questions about people's comfort. Like, so we have questions about kind of how much they use this stuff and how comfortable they are using this stuff. And I think, now I'm blanking, but there was a study looking at voice assistant, trust in voice assistant systems, and people who had used computers more just trusted the answers more, right? And so you could see that kind of interacting with the accent stuff too a little bit, that you're just, how much you trust these systems in general could play with the accent and and then there's also the expectation, like, is there a voice assistant accent now? Is it already mainstream? And maybe that's a little bit what Lisa was getting at, I don't know. But like, you know how we're like, oh, regional accent, this is the accent of here, this is the accent of there. Some people might be like, I want a voice assistant to have a mainstream accent because that's the voice they have. Like, that's how they were built. I'm very used to them. I use them all the time. That's what their accent is, right? And anything else is like fake or phony or something. And you could get maybe some negative responses from them because they're like, that's not what they sound like, right? But yeah, that's I think especially Cohen, we go young, we could go old, yeah. And I will say we've also been looking at international students as well, because, you know, here we're framing it as your accent, not accent. With the international students, neither of them are their accents, right? And so, international non-native speakers of English, right? And so that's kind of another question as well.